In the year 570 BC, on the sun-drenched island of Samos in the Aegean Sea, a child was born who would become one of history's most mysterious and influential figures. His name was Pythagoras, and the world he entered was a place where gods walked among mortals, where mathematics was sacred, and where the boundary between genius and madness was razor-thin. But here's what's fascinating about Pythagoras. Most people know him for a single theorem about right triangles that they learned in school and promptly forgot. What they don't know is that this man founded what was essentially history's first cult of mathematics. He believed numbers were alive. He thought beans were evil. He claimed he could remember his past lives stretching back centuries. And his followers, they would rather die than reveal his secrets. This is the story of a man who bridged the gap between ancient mysticism and modern science. A philosopher who treated mathematics like religion and religion like mathematics. Someone whose ideas about the fundamental nature of reality would echo through Plato, influence early Christianity, and lay the groundwork for how we understand the universe today. What I'm about to tell you isn't just the biography of an ancient Greek thinker. It's the origin story of Western intellectual tradition itself. The moment when humanity first glimpsed the mathematical code underlying all existence. And trust me, by the end of this journey, through Pythagoras' extraordinary life, you'll never look at numbers the same way again. But before we dive into this incredible story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. It's a simple way to support our work, and it means everything to me. I'm always curious where in the world you're watching from, so drop a comment and let me know. And now, settle back as we travel to a world where mathematics and mysticism dance together in ways that would seem impossible today. Samos in the 6th century BC was a jewel of the ancient world. This island, just off the coast of what is now Turkey, sat at the crossroads of civilizations. Egyptian merchants brought gold and wisdom from the Nile. Babylonian astronomers shared their knowledge of the stars. Persian traders carried spices and strange new ideas about the soul. It was a place where cultures collided and mixed, where a curious mind could encounter the accumulated wisdom of the ancient world. The island was ruled by Polycrates, a tyrant in the old Greek sense of the word. Not necessarily cruel, but someone who had seized power and ruled without constitutional authority. Polycrates had transformed Samos into a naval powerhouse. His ships controlled the sea lanes. His engineers built marvels that made other cities jealous. The tunnel of Eupalinos, a kilometre-long aqueduct carved straight through a mountain, stood as proof of what human ingenuity could accomplish. Into this world of ambition and innovation, Pythagoras was born to Menisarchus, a gem engraver, and Pythias, about whom history tells us frustratingly little. Some ancient sources claim his father was a merchant who travelled widely, bringing home not just goods but stories and ideas from distant lands. Others suggest the family had aristocratic connections. What seems certain is that young Pythagoras grew up in a household where learning was valued and curiosity encouraged. The boy showed unusual gifts early. Ancient biographers, writing centuries later, and with a tendency toward the mythological, claimed he possessed supernatural beauty and intelligence. They said he could charm wild animals with his voice, and that he bore a golden mark on his thigh, proof of his divine nature. Whether or not we believe these tales, they point to something real. Pythagoras was extraordinary, and people noticed. His education began with the best teachers Samos could offer. He studied with Hermodamus, a descendant of the poet Homer, learning the epic verses that form the backbone of Greek culture. Music was central to his training, not just entertainment, but a mathematical art that revealed the hidden harmonies of the cosmos. He learned to play the lyre, to understand rhythm and melody, to see how mathematical ratios created beautiful sounds. But Samos, for all its wonders, could not contain a mind like his. The young Pythagoras hungered for knowledge that went beyond what any single teacher could provide. He wanted to understand the fundamental principles that governed everything, from the movement of planets to the growth of plants. And so, sometime in his 20s, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He would leave his comfortable island home and seek wisdom wherever it could be found. His first destination was Miletus, a bustling commercial city on the nearby mainland. Here lived Thales, already ancient but still sharp, the man many consider the first true philosopher. Thales had shocked the Greek world by predicting a solar eclipse and by claiming that everything was made of water. More importantly, he had introduced something revolutionary: the idea that natural events had natural causes, not just the whims of gods. Pythagoras found in Thales a kindred spirit, someone who believed that mathematics and careful observation could unlock the secrets of existence. The old man taught him geometry, astronomy, and something even more valuable: a way of thinking that looked beyond surface appearances to underlying patterns and principles. But Thales, now in his 80s, knew his time was limited. He urged his eager student to continue his education in Egypt, where the priests guarded wisdom that stretched back thousands of years. The journey to Egypt was not undertaken lightly. It meant months of dangerous travel by sea and land. Pirates haunted the Mediterranean. Storms could dash ships against rocky coasts. Egypt itself was a land of ancient mysteries, where foreigners were viewed with suspicion and sacred knowledge was closely guarded. But Pythagoras was determined. He had glimpsed something in his studies with Thales, a hint that behind the chaos of everyday experience lay a beautiful mathematical order. He needed to learn more. The Egypt that Pythagoras entered around 535 BC was a civilization already ancient beyond Greek imagination. The Great Pyramids had stood for over 2,000 years. The temples of Memphis and Heliopolis housed libraries that preserved knowledge from the dawn of history. The priests who served in these temples were not just religious figures, but scientists, mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers. They had mapped the stars, calculated the flooding of the Nile, and developed mathematical techniques that amazed visiting Greeks. But gaining access to this wisdom was not simply a matter of showing up and asking to be taught. The Egyptian priesthood was exclusive, hierarchical, and deeply suspicious of outsiders. Pythagoras would need to prove himself worthy. According to later accounts, he underwent a lengthy initiation process that tested not just his intellectual abilities, but his moral character and spiritual dedication. The initiation began with purification rituals. Pythagoras was required to fast for extended periods, to abstain from certain foods, and to maintain ritual cleanliness. He learned that the Egyptians saw the body as a temple that must be kept pure if the soul was to perceive higher truths. This emphasis on purification, on the connection between physical discipline and spiritual insight, would remain central to his thinking for the rest of his life. Once deemed worthy of instruction, Pythagoras was introduced to the mathematical techniques that had allowed Egyptian engineers to build their monuments and astronomers to track celestial cycles with incredible precision. He learned about the sacred geometry that governed temple construction. He discovered how the Egyptians used right triangles with sides in the ratio 3:4:5 to create perfect right angles for their buildings. This was practical mathematics, but it was also something more. The Egyptians taught that these mathematical relationships reflected the fundamental structure of reality itself. The priests shared their knowledge of astronomy, showing Pythagoras how to calculate the movements of planets and predict eclipses. They taught him about the mathematical relationships that governed musical harmony, revealing how the same ratios that pleased the ear could be found in the orbits of celestial bodies. Everything was connected, they insisted. The same mathematical principles that created beautiful music also kept the stars in their courses. But perhaps most importantly, the Egyptian priests introduced Pythagoras to ideas about the soul that would transform his understanding of human nature. They taught that the soul was immortal, that it had existed before birth, and would continue after death. Death was not an ending, but a transition, a movement from one state of existence to another. The soul could be reborn in different bodies, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom or ignorance of previous lives. This doctrine of transmigration was revolutionary for a Greek raised on Homer's vision of the afterlife as a shadowy realm of barely conscious spirits. The Egyptians claimed that the soul was divine, that it had fallen from a higher realm and become trapped in matter. The goal of life was to purify the soul, to free it from the prison of the body, to enable it to return to its divine source. And the key to this purification was knowledge, particularly mathematical knowledge, which revealed the eternal truths that lay beyond the world of change and decay. Pythagoras spent years in Egypt, moving from temple to temple, learning from different schools of priests. He mastered their mathematical techniques, absorbed their astronomical knowledge, and embraced their spiritual teachings. But he was more than just a student. His sharp mind and innovative thinking impressed his teachers. He began to see connections they had missed, to develop new ways of understanding the mathematical principles they had preserved. The experience transformed him. When he had arrived in Egypt, he was a brilliant young Greek seeking knowledge. When he left, he was something new, a philosopher mystic who had synthesized Greek rationality with Egyptian spirituality. He carried with him not just techniques and facts, but a vision of reality as fundamentally mathematical, a universe where numbers were not just tools for calculation, but the very substance of existence. But his education was not complete. Egypt had given him a foundation, but there were other traditions to explore, other sources of wisdom to tap. His next destination would be Babylon, the great city of the East where astronomer priests had mapped the heavens with extraordinary precision and developed mathematical techniques that surpassed even those of Egypt. The journey from Egypt to Babylon was long and perilous, crossing deserts and navigating the complex politics of the Persian Empire. But Pythagoras was no longer the young seeker who had left Samos years earlier. He was becoming something unprecedented in the ancient world, a synthesizer of traditions, someone who could take the best insights from different cultures and weave them into something new and powerful. The Babylon that Pythagoras entered around 530 BC was unlike anything he had ever seen. This was the crown jewel of the Persian Empire, a city of hanging gardens and towering ziggurats where the very air seemed to hum with intellectual energy. The Babylonians had been studying the stars for over a millennium, and their knowledge of astronomy was legendary throughout the ancient world. But gaining access to this knowledge would prove even more challenging than his trials in Egypt. The Babylonian priest astronomers were notoriously secretive. Their mathematical techniques closely guarded state secrets. These men didn't just predict eclipses for religious ceremonies. They advised kings on matters of war and peace based on their readings of celestial omens. Their knowledge was power, and power was not shared lightly. Pythagoras found himself in a city where mathematics had reached heights that seemed almost magical. The Babylonians had developed a sophisticated number system based on 60 rather than 10, allowing them to perform calculations of stunning complexity. They could predict the positions of planets years in advance. They had discovered mathematical relationships in the movements of celestial bodies that wouldn't be rediscovered in the West for over 1,000 years. What fascinated Pythagoras most was their approach to numbers themselves. Unlike the practical Egyptian mathematics he had learned, Babylonian number theory seemed to touch something deeper. They had discovered what we now call the Pythagorean theorem centuries before Pythagoras was born, using it not just for construction, but as a key to understanding the hidden structure of reality. They saw numbers as having personalities, relationships, and powers that went far beyond mere counting. The Babylonians taught him about what they called perfect numbers and friendly numbers, mathematical relationships that seemed to reveal a cosmic harmony. They showed him how the same numerical ratios that governed musical intervals could be found in the orbits of planets. The universe, they insisted, was not random chaos but a vast musical composition written in the language of mathematics. But it was their understanding of the mystical properties of numbers that truly captured Pythagoras' imagination. The Babylonians had developed an elaborate numerology that assigned spiritual significance to different numbers. One represented unity, the divine source from which all things emerged. Two represented division, the fundamental duality that created the material world. Three represented harmony, the resolution of opposites. Four represented stability, the foundation of earthly existence. These weren't arbitrary assignments, but reflected deep philosophical insights about the nature of reality. Numbers, the Babylonians taught, were not human inventions but divine principles that existed independently of human thought. To understand numbers was to understand the mind of the gods. Mathematics was not just a tool, but a form of religious practice, a way of communing with the divine order that governed all things. Pythagoras spent months learning their computational techniques, mastering their astronomical calculations, and absorbing their numerical mysticism. But he was also developing his own insights, seeing patterns and connections that even his learned teachers had missed. He began to envision a grand synthesis that would combine the geometric insights of Egypt with the numerical mysticism of Babylon and the rational inquiry he had learned from Thales. The political situation in Babylon was becoming increasingly unstable. The Persian Empire was vast but unwieldy, and rebellions were brewing in distant provinces. Foreign scholars like Pythagoras were viewed with growing suspicion. It was time to move on, but his destination this time was not another centre of learning. He had decided to return to the Greek world, carrying with him the accumulated wisdom of three great civilizations. The journey home was fraught with danger. The Persian Empire was mobilizing for war against the Greek cities, and travel between east and west was becoming increasingly difficult. Pirates controlled many sea routes, and overland travel meant crossing territories where bandits preyed on wealthy merchants and foreign scholars. But Pythagoras had learned more than just mathematics and astronomy during his years abroad. He had also acquired the confidence and resourcefulness of a man who had survived in alien cultures. When he finally reached the Aegean Sea and caught sight of familiar Greek islands, Pythagoras was no longer the young seeker who had left Samos decades earlier. He was now a master of ancient wisdom, someone who had penetrated the deepest mysteries of the most learned civilizations on Earth. But he was also something entirely new, a philosopher who had synthesized traditions that had never been combined before. His first stop was not Samos but Crete, where he had heard of ancient traditions that might shed light on the mystical practices he had encountered in the East. The Cretans preserved memories of the old Minoan civilization, with its mysterious snake goddesses and elaborate purification rituals. Here Pythagoras encountered ideas about spiritual transformation that complemented what he had learned about the transmigration of souls. The Cretan mysteries taught that the soul could be purified through ritual practices and moral discipline. They spoke of initiates who could remember their past lives, who could communicate with the spirits of the dead, who could even achieve a kind of temporary union with the divine. These were not mere superstitions, but sophisticated techniques for altering consciousness and expanding awareness. Pythagoras found himself particularly drawn to their teachings about the relationship between music and spiritual transformation. The Cretans used specific musical modes and rhythms in their ceremonies, claiming that certain combinations of sounds could induce trance states and facilitate contact with higher realms. This resonated powerfully with the mathematical understanding of music he had gained in Egypt and Babylon. He began to experiment with combining the numerical principles he had learned with the practical techniques of spiritual transformation preserved in Crete. Music became his laboratory, the place where abstract mathematical relationships could be tested through direct experience. He discovered that when he tuned his lyre according to precise mathematical ratios and played specific sequences of notes, he could indeed induce altered states of consciousness in himself and others. But these experiences raise profound questions. If mathematical relationships could produce such powerful effects on human consciousness, what did that say about the nature of reality itself? Were numbers merely human concepts projected onto an indifferent universe, or were they fundamental features of existence that human minds could discover and use? Pythagoras was developing a revolutionary answer to these questions. Numbers, he was beginning to believe, were not just tools for describing reality. They were reality. Everything that existed, from the smallest grain of sand to the largest star, was fundamentally mathematical in nature. The physical world was simply numbers made manifest, divine principles taking temporary form in matter. This insight would transform not just his own understanding, but the entire trajectory of Western thought. He was standing at the threshold of discoveries that would influence Plato, shape early Christianity, and lay the foundation for modern science. But he was also about to face the greatest challenge of his life. Returning to the Greek world meant confronting the political realities that had driven him to seek wisdom abroad in the first place. The Samos he returned to was no longer the prosperous independent island of his youth. Polycrates had overreached himself, making enemies of powerful neighbours and finally falling victim to a Persian trap. The island was now under Persian control, its independence destroyed, its spirit broken. Many of the leading families had fled to other Greek cities. The intellectual atmosphere that had nurtured Pythagoras' early development had evaporated. Worse still, Pythagoras himself was viewed with suspicion by both the Persian authorities and his fellow Greeks. To the Persians, he was a potential spy who had spent years in the heart of their empire. To many Greeks, he was a traitor who had consorted with their enemies and absorbed foreign ideas that threatened traditional Greek values. The knowledge he had worked so hard to acquire was seen by some as a form of contamination. But Pythagoras had not spent decades learning the deepest secrets of ancient civilizations only to be silenced by provincial prejudices. He had a mission now, a vision of how mathematical wisdom could transform human society. If Samos was no longer receptive to his teachings, he would find another place where his ideas could take root and flourish. His eyes turned westward to the Greek colonies of southern Italy. This region, known as Magna Graecia, was experiencing an intellectual renaissance. Cities like Croton, Metapontum, and Tarentum were attracting philosophers, mathematicians, and artists from across the Greek world. Here, far from the political turmoil of the Eastern Aegean, new ideas could flourish without the suspicion that plagued the old homeland. Croton particularly caught his attention. This prosperous city on the southern coast of Italy had a reputation for producing exceptional athletes and hosting some of the finest medical schools in the Greek world. The Crotoniates were known for their interest in the relationship between physical health and spiritual well-being, ideas that resonated with Pythagoras' own understanding of purification and the soul's journey toward enlightenment. In 530 BC, at the age of 40, Pythagoras arrived in Croton, carrying nothing but his extraordinary learning and a revolutionary vision of how society could be organized according to mathematical principles. The man who stepped off the ship was no longer the curious young seeker who had left Samos decades earlier. He had been transformed by his encounters with the wisdom traditions of the ancient world. but he had also transformed those traditions, creating something entirely new. His appearance alone marked him as different. Where other philosophers dressed simply, Pythagoras wore the white robes that had become his trademark during his time in Egypt. His bearing was that of a man who had communed with the divine, who carried within himself secrets that could unlock the mysteries of existence. When he spoke, people listened, not just because of his words, but because of the presence he radiated. Word of the foreign philosopher spread quickly through Croton. Here was a man who claimed to remember his past lives, who could predict eclipses with mathematical precision, who taught that numbers were the fundamental reality underlying all existence. Some dismissed him as a charlatan or a madman, but others, particularly among the city's educated elite, found themselves drawn to his teachings with an intensity that surprised them. His first public lectures drew curious crowds. Pythagoras spoke not in the technical language of mathematics, but in metaphors and stories that made abstract concepts accessible to ordinary listeners. He told of his travels, of the wisdom he had encountered in distant lands, but always he returned to his central theme. The universe was not chaos but cosmos, order, a vast mathematical symphony in which every element played its assigned part. He demonstrated musical harmonies, showing how mathematical ratios created beautiful sounds. He drew geometric diagrams in the sand, revealing the elegant relationships that governed space and form. He spoke of the movements of planets as a celestial dance choreographed by numerical laws. Everything was connected, he insisted, and the key to understanding these connections was mathematics. But Pythagoras was not content merely to teach abstract principles. He had a more ambitious goal. He wanted to create a community where these principles could be lived, where mathematical wisdom could transform not just individual understanding, but the very structure of society. This would be more than a school. It would be a new way of life, a demonstration of how human beings could organize themselves according to divine mathematical laws. The community he envisioned would be radically different from anything that existed in the Greek world. Its members would share property in common, recognizing that mathematical truth belonged to everyone and could not be owned by individuals. They would follow strict dietary laws, understanding that what they ate affected their ability to perceive higher truths. They would practice disciplines of silence and contemplation, creating the mental clarity necessary for mathematical insight. Most revolutionary of all, the community would include women as equal members. This was almost unthinkable in a culture where women were largely excluded from intellectual life. But Pythagoras had seen in Egypt how priestesses served alongside priests in the temples, how women could achieve the same spiritual insights as men. Mathematics, he argued, was neither male nor female, but universal, accessible to any soul capable of rational thought. The first converts to his vision were drawn primarily from Croton's aristocratic families. These were people who had the leisure to pursue philosophical study and the wealth to support a new kind of community. But they were also individuals who felt something missing in their conventional lives, who sensed that beneath the surface of everyday existence lay deeper truths waiting to be discovered. Among his earliest followers was a wealthy young man named Alcmaeon, who would become one of the first to develop the medical theories that Pythagoras taught. Alcmaeon was fascinated by the philosopher's claim that the body was a microcosm of the universe, governed by the same mathematical principles that ruled the stars. Under Pythagoras' guidance, he began to investigate the numerical ratios that governed health and disease. Another early disciple was Theano, a brilliant young woman from a prominent Crotoniate family, who would eventually become Pythagoras' wife and closest collaborator. Theano possessed a mathematical mind that could match her teachers, and she brought to the community a practical wisdom that helped translate abstract philosophical principles into workable social arrangements. The growing band of followers began to call themselves the Pythagoreans, though they also used other names that reflected their unique character. Sometimes they called themselves the mathematikoi, the learners, emphasizing their commitment to continuous study and growth. Other times they used the term acousmatikoi, the listeners, referring to their practice of silent attention during Pythagoras' teachings. As the community grew, it developed increasingly elaborate initiation rituals and levels of membership. New candidates underwent lengthy periods of testing and purification before being admitted to the inner circle. They were required to demonstrate not just intellectual ability, but moral character, showing that they could subordinate personal desires to the pursuit of truth and the welfare of the community. The most committed members took vows that bound them to the Pythagorean way of life for the rest of their days. They promised to share their possessions, to maintain the secrecy of the community's teachings, to practice the dietary restrictions and purification rituals that Pythagoras prescribed. They agreed to follow a daily routine that balanced physical exercise, intellectual study, and spiritual contemplation. The community's daily life was structured around mathematical principles. Members rose before dawn for purification rituals and morning exercises designed to prepare the soul for learning. They gathered for communal meals, where conversations focused on philosophical questions rather than ordinary gossip. Evenings were devoted to the study of mathematics, astronomy, and music, always seeking to discover new connections between numerical relationships and natural phenomena. But the Pythagoreans were not content to pursue knowledge for its own sake. They believed that their mathematical insights gave them special responsibilities toward the larger society. Several members became active in Crotoniate politics, attempting to implement reforms based on Pythagorean principles. They advocated for more equitable distribution of wealth, for educational systems that emphasized mathematical training, for legal codes based on rational principles rather than mere tradition. Their political influence grew rapidly. Within a few years of Pythagoras' arrival, Pythagoreans held key positions in Croton's government and were implementing policies that reflected their philosophical commitments. They established public schools where children could receive the kind of mathematical education that had previously been available only to the wealthy. They reformed the legal system to emphasize rehabilitation rather than punishment, believing that crime resulted from ignorance rather than inherent evil. The success of the Pythagorean experiment in Croton attracted attention throughout the Greek world. Other cities invited Pythagoras to establish communities in their territories. Soon there were Pythagorean schools in Metapontum, Tarentum, and other cities throughout southern Italy. The movement was becoming more than a philosophical school, it was becoming a force for social transformation. But success brought new challenges. As the Pythagoreans gained political power, they also made enemies among those who felt threatened by their reforms. Traditional aristocrats resented the community's emphasis on merit rather than birth. Democrats were suspicious of what they saw as an intellectual elite claiming special authority based on esoteric knowledge. Ordinary citizens were sometimes put off by the Pythagorean strict lifestyle and their claims to superior wisdom. The community's secrecy also bred suspicion and wild rumours. What exactly did the Pythagoreans do in their private meetings? What were these mysterious mathematical truths they claimed to possess? Why did they refuse to eat beans or allow certain foods in their presence? The more secretive they became, the more exotic and threatening they appeared to outsiders. Tensions were building that would eventually explode into violent conflict. But for now, in these early years of the community's existence, Pythagoras could feel satisfied that his vision was taking shape. He had created something unprecedented, a society organized around mathematical principles, a living demonstration of how divine wisdom could transform human relationships. The philosophical teachings that emerged from this community would influence Western thought for millennia, but they would also prove controversial in ways that Pythagoras himself might not have anticipated. The claim that numbers were the fundamental reality would challenge basic assumptions about the nature of existence. The belief in the transmigration of souls would conflict with emerging ideas about individual identity and moral responsibility. Most importantly, the Pythagorean synthesis of mathematics and mysticism would create a template for future attempts to find spiritual meaning in scientific knowledge. From Plato's Academy to medieval Islamic philosophy to modern quantum mechanics, thinkers would return again and again to the Pythagorean insight that mathematical relationships reveal something profound about the ultimate nature of reality. But all of this lay in the future. For now, Pythagoras was focused on the immediate task of building his revolutionary community and developing the mathematical insights that would justify his extraordinary claims about the nature of existence. The mathematical discoveries that emerged from the Pythagorean community were unlike anything the ancient world had seen before. While other philosophers debated abstract questions about the nature of reality, Pythagoras and his followers were uncovering concrete numerical relationships that seemed to govern everything from musical harmony to the movements of celestial bodies. Their most famous discovery, the theorem that bears Pythagoras' name, was actually known to Babylonian mathematicians centuries earlier. But what made the Pythagorean approach revolutionary was not the discovery itself, but what they believed it revealed about the fundamental nature of existence. For them, the relationship between the sides of a right triangle was not merely a useful tool for builders and surveyors. It was a glimpse into the mathematical mind of the divine. The theorem stated that in any right triangle, the square of the hypotenuse equals the sum of squares of the other two sides. Written as an equation, this becomes the elegant formula that millions of students have memorized without truly understanding its profound implications. But to Pythagoras, this simple relationship was proof that the universe operated according to precise mathematical laws, that harmony and order lay beneath apparent chaos. The discovery process itself became a model for how the Pythagoreans approached all learning. They would begin with careful observation, measuring and calculating with obsessive precision. They would look for patterns, seeking numerical relationships that might reveal deeper truths. Then they would test these relationships, applying them to new situations to see if the patterns held. Finally, they would contemplate the philosophical implications, asking what these mathematical truths revealed about the nature of reality itself. Music provided their most compelling evidence for the mathematical structure of the universe. Pythagoras had learned from his Egyptian and Babylonian teachers that musical harmony was based on simple numerical ratios. When he plucked two strings of the same tension and thickness, he found that the most pleasing combinations occurred when the lengths were in simple proportions. A string half the length of another produced a note exactly 1 octave higher. Strings in a ratio of 2 to 3 created the perfect fifth, while a 3 to 4 ratio yielded the perfect fourth. But the implications went far beyond music theory. If the ear found certain numerical ratios inherently pleasing, if these same ratios appeared throughout nature, then perhaps the entire cosmos was structured according to mathematical principles that human consciousness could recognize and appreciate. The harmony that pleased the ear might be the same harmony that kept planets in their orbits and regulated the cycles of growth and decay in the natural world. This led to one of the most beautiful and influential ideas in Pythagorean philosophy, the concept of the harmony of the spheres. Pythagoras taught that the planets, as they moved through space, produced musical tones based on their speeds and distances from the Earth. The faster planets produced higher notes, the slower ones lower notes, and together they created a cosmic symphony of perfect mathematical harmony. Most humans could not hear this celestial music because they had been exposed to it from birth and had learned to tune it out, like people living near a waterfall who no longer notice its sound. But those who purified their souls and trained their consciousness could sometimes catch glimpses of this divine harmony. It was, according to Pythagoras, one of the greatest rewards of the philosophical life. The mathematical investigations of the community extended into every area of study. They explored the numerical properties of geometric shapes, discovering relationships between angles, areas, and volumes that revealed hidden connections in spatial reality. They investigated the mathematical basis of astronomical cycles, developing more accurate methods for predicting eclipses and planetary movements. They even applied numerical analysis to medicine, seeking the mathematical ratios that governed health and disease in the human body. Alcmaeon, working under Pythagoras' guidance, developed a medical theory based on the concept of numerical balance. Health, he argued, resulted from the proper mathematical relationship between opposing forces in the body: hot and cold, wet and dry, sweet and bitter. Disease occurred when these ratios fell out of harmony, and healing involved restoring the proper numerical relationships through diet, exercise, and other interventions. This mathematical approach to medicine was revolutionary. Instead of attributing illness to the anger of gods or the influence of evil spirits, the Pythagoreans sought natural causes that could be understood and addressed through rational methods. They were laying the groundwork for a scientific approach to healing that would eventually transform medical practice throughout the ancient world. The community's investigations into number theory itself yielded discoveries that would influence mathematics for centuries. They classified numbers into different types based on their properties and relationships. Perfect numbers, like 6 and 28, equaled the sum of their proper divisors. Triangular numbers could be arranged in triangular patterns. Square numbers formed perfect squares when represented as dots. Each type of number was believed to have not just mathematical properties, but spiritual significance. Odd numbers were considered masculine and divine, associated with unity and wholeness. Even numbers were feminine and earthly, representing division and multiplicity. The number 1 was not really a number at all, but the source from which all numbers emerged, the mathematical equivalent of the divine unity from which all existence flowed. The number 10 held special significance as the sum of the first 4 integers, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. The Pythagoreans called this the tetractys and considered it the most sacred of all numerical relationships. It represented the progression from unity to multiplicity, from the divine source through the stages of creation to the manifest world. They swore their most solemn oaths by the tetractys, treating it with the reverence other Greeks reserved for the gods. But perhaps the most profound discovery of the Pythagorean school was also the most disturbing. While investigating the properties of right triangles, they discovered numbers that could not be expressed as simple fractions. When they applied their theorem to a right triangle with sides of length 1, they found that the hypotenuse had a length that could not be written as the ratio of 2 whole numbers. This discovery of what we now call irrational numbers created a crisis within the Pythagorean community. If numbers were the fundamental reality underlying all existence, how could there be numerical relationships that could not be expressed in terms of the simple ratios they considered divine? The discovery threatened the very foundation of their mathematical mysticism. Legend has it that the Pythagorean who first proved the existence of irrational numbers was sworn to secrecy, and when he violated this oath by sharing the discovery with outsiders, he was expelled from the community or even killed. Whether or not this dramatic story is true, it reflects the profound challenge that irrational numbers posed to Pythagorean philosophy. The community's response to this crisis revealed both their intellectual honesty and their deep commitment to their philosophical framework. Rather than suppressing the discovery or denying its implications, they worked to understand how irrational numbers could fit within their vision of a mathematically ordered universe. They developed new ways of thinking about numerical relationships that could accommodate these troublesome quantities while preserving their fundamental insight about the mathematical nature of reality. This intellectual flexibility was characteristic of the Pythagorean approach to learning. Despite their reputation for dogmatic adherence to strange rules and beliefs, they were actually remarkably open to new evidence and willing to revise their theories when confronted with compelling mathematical proof. Their commitment was not to any particular set of doctrines, but to the underlying principle that reality could be understood through careful mathematical investigation. The practical applications of their mathematical discoveries began to transform life in the cities where Pythagorean communities had taken root. Their improved astronomical calculations led to more accurate calendars and better navigation techniques. Their architectural innovations, based on mathematical principles of proportion and harmony, resulted in buildings of unprecedented beauty and structural integrity. Their medical theories contributed to more effective treatments for various ailments, but it was their political influence that would ultimately prove most controversial. The Pythagoreans believed that their mathematical insights gave them special qualifications for leadership. They argued that just as mathematical laws govern the natural world, so human society should be organized according to rational principles discoverable through philosophical investigation. This led them to advocate for what they called the rule of the wise, a form of government where political power would be exercised by those who had achieved the highest levels of mathematical and philosophical understanding. It was an early version of what Plato would later call the rule of philosopher kings, and it proved just as problematic in practice as it would in Plato's Republic. The Pythagorean vision of rational government included several radical innovations. They proposed that laws should be based on mathematical principles rather than tradition or the arbitrary will of rulers. They advocated for educational systems that would give all citizens access to mathematical training, believing that an educated populace was necessary for a just society. They even suggested that economic relationships should be governed by mathematical concepts of proportion and fairness. Some of these ideas were implemented in the cities where Pythagoreans gained political influence. Croton, in particular, became a testing ground for Pythagorean political theory. The city's laws were revised to emphasize rational principles over traditional customs. Public funds were devoted to mathematical education. Economic policies attempted to create more equitable distribution of wealth based on mathematical concepts of proportional justice. For a time, these experiments seemed successful. Croton prospered under Pythagorean influence, achieving new levels of cultural sophistication and economic stability. Other cities sought to implement similar reforms, and the Pythagorean movement spread throughout southern Italy and beyond. But the very success of the Pythagorean political experiment contained the seeds of its eventual destruction. As the community gained power and influence, it also attracted envy and resentment from those who felt excluded from its benefits. The emphasis on mathematical education and rational governance appealed to intellectuals and the wealthy, but it often seemed cold and elitist to ordinary citizens who valued traditional ways of life. Moreover, the Pythagorean claim to possess special wisdom that qualified them for political leadership struck many as arrogant and dangerous. Democracy was beginning to emerge as an alternative to traditional aristocratic rule, and the idea that a self-selected group of philosophers should govern based on their mathematical insights seemed to many like a new form of tyranny disguised as enlightenment. The community's secretive nature only added to the suspicions surrounding them. What were these mysterious teachings that could only be shared among the initiated? Why did the Pythagoreans refuse to explain their beliefs to outsiders? The very practices that had helped preserve and develop their mathematical insights began to seem threatening to those who felt excluded from their benefits. Tensions were building that would soon explode into violence. But before that crisis arrived, Pythagoras and his followers would make one more discovery that would shake the foundations of their mathematical mysticism and force them to confront the deepest questions about the nature of knowledge and reality. The discovery came through their investigation of musical harmony. While experimenting with different ways of tuning their instruments, they found relationships between sounds that could not be expressed in the simple numerical ratios that formed the basis of their harmonic theory. Just as their geometric investigations had revealed irrational numbers, their musical research was uncovering harmonious relationships that seemed to exist outside the mathematical framework they had constructed to explain them. This second crisis in Pythagorean mathematics was even more challenging than the first. Music had been the cornerstone of their proof that the universe was fundamentally mathematical. If musical harmony itself could not be completely explained by simple numerical relationships, what did that say about their entire philosophical system? The community's response to this challenge would test their intellectual courage and determine whether their mathematical mysticism could evolve to accommodate new discoveries or would collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Under the weight of its own contradictions, the crisis over musical harmony forced the Pythagoreans to confront a fundamental question that would echo through centuries of philosophical debate. If the universe was truly mathematical in nature, why did some of the most beautiful and harmonious phenomena resist reduction to simple numerical relationships? The answer they developed would prove to be one of their most sophisticated and influential contributions to human thought. Pythagoras himself took the lead in addressing this challenge. Now in his 60s, the master had lost none of his intellectual vigour or his ability to synthesize apparently contradictory insights into a higher understanding. He gathered his most advanced students in the inner sanctum of their meeting hall, a circular room whose proportions were based on the golden ratio and whose acoustic properties had been carefully calculated to enhance both speech and musical performance. For weeks they wrestled with the implications of their discoveries. Some argued that the existence of non-rational harmonies disproved their fundamental thesis about the mathematical nature of reality. Others suggested that their understanding of mathematics itself was simply incomplete, that there were higher forms of numerical relationship they had not yet discovered. The debates grew heated, threatening to split the community apart. But Pythagoras proposed a different interpretation, one that would transform their understanding of both mathematics and reality. Perhaps, he suggested, the universe operated on multiple levels of mathematical organization. The simple ratios they had discovered represented one layer of cosmic harmony, but there were deeper, more complex mathematical structures that governed phenomena that appeared irrational from a limited perspective. This insight led to a revolutionary expansion of Pythagorean mathematical philosophy. They began to explore what we might now call higher-order mathematical relationships, patterns that emerged only when simple numerical ratios were combined in complex ways. They discovered that sequences of numbers could have properties that no individual number possessed, that geometric shapes could embody mathematical principles that could not be reduced to simple arithmetic. The concept of mathematical infinity began to take shape in their thinking. If numbers extended endlessly in both directions, if geometric figures could be divided infinitely, then perhaps the universe itself was structured as an infinite hierarchy of mathematical relationships. What appeared irrational at one level might reveal its underlying mathematical nature when viewed from a higher perspective. This new understanding of mathematics as a multi-layered, infinitely complex system had profound implications for their spiritual teachings. The soul's journey through multiple lifetimes, they now realized, was itself a process of ascending through different levels of mathematical understanding. Each incarnation offered opportunities to grasp new aspects of the cosmic mathematical order, to perceive patterns that had been invisible from lower levels of consciousness. The purification practices that had always been central to Pythagorean life took on new meaning in light of these insights. Dietary restrictions, meditation exercises, and mathematical study were not arbitrary rules, but carefully designed methods for preparing the mind to perceive increasingly subtle mathematical relationships. The goal was not simply to understand individual theorems, but to develop the kind of consciousness that could apprehend the infinite mathematical symphony of existence itself. This evolved Pythagorean philosophy began to attract a new generation of followers who were drawn not just to mathematical discoveries, but to the promise of spiritual transformation through mathematical contemplation. Among these new disciples was a young man named Empedocles, who would later become famous for his theory of the four elements, and Parmenides, whose logical arguments about the nature of being would influence Plato and shape the entire tradition of Western metaphysics. But the community's growing sophistication in mathematical philosophy was accompanied by increasing isolation from the practical concerns of ordinary citizens. The more abstract their teachings became, the less accessible they seemed to people who were struggling with the basic challenges of daily life. The gap between the Pythagorean elite and the broader population was widening, creating resentments that would soon boil over into violence. The political situation in Croton was becoming increasingly unstable. The city's traditional aristocratic families resented the influence of what they saw as foreign interlopers who had gained power through mysterious knowledge rather than inherited status. Democratic factions opposed what they viewed as an intellectual tyranny that excluded ordinary citizens from political participation. Even some former supporters of the Pythagoreans began to question whether their rule had become too removed from popular concerns. The community's response to these mounting tensions revealed both their strengths and their fatal weaknesses. Their commitment to rational discourse and mathematical precision made them excellent at solving technical problems, but poor at understanding the emotional and symbolic dimensions of political conflict. They approached political opposition as if it were a mathematical error that could be corrected through better arguments and clearer explanations. Pythagoras himself seemed increasingly detached from these worldly concerns. Now approaching 70, he spent most of his time in contemplation and advanced mathematical research, leaving the day-to-day management of both the community and their political activities to younger disciples. This withdrawal from active leadership created a vacuum that was filled by followers who lacked his wisdom and diplomatic skills. The crisis came to a head around 510 BC, sparked by a seemingly minor incident that revealed the depth of popular resentment against Pythagorean influence. A young man named Cylon, from one of Croton's most prominent traditional families, had applied for membership in the Pythagorean community and been rejected. The reasons for his rejection remain unclear, but it may have been due to concerns about his moral character or his motives for seeking initiation. Cylon's rejection might have been forgotten if not for the arrogant way in which some Pythagoreans handled the situation. Instead of offering a diplomatic explanation or suggesting alternative ways he might contribute to their work, they treated him with the kind of intellectual condescension that had become characteristic of the community's interactions with outsiders. This personal humiliation transformed Cylon from a merely disappointed applicant into an implacable enemy. Cylon began organizing opposition to the Pythagoreans, appealing to all the various groups that had grievances against their rule. He formed an alliance between traditional aristocrats who wanted to restore the old order, democratic activists who demanded popular participation in government, and ordinary citizens who felt excluded from the benefits of Pythagorean policies. His message was simple but powerful. The Pythagoreans were foreign usurpers who had gained control through trickery and maintained power through secrecy. the propaganda campaign against the Pythagoreans grew increasingly vicious. They were accused of practicing black magic, of corrupting the youth with dangerous foreign ideas, of plotting to overthrow traditional Greek religion in favour of their mathematical mysticism. The community's dietary restrictions were portrayed as evidence of their alienation from normal human concerns. Their mathematical investigations were characterised as attempts to discover supernatural powers that would make them invulnerable to ordinary citizens. Most damaging of all was the accusation that the Pythagoreans considered themselves superior to other human beings and believed they had the right to rule based on their supposed intellectual superiority. This charge struck at the heart of emerging Greek democratic ideals and made even some sympathetic observers question whether the Pythagorean experiment had gone too far. The community's attempts to respond to these attacks only made the situation worse. Their explanations of their mathematical philosophy sounded like incomprehensible jargon to ordinary citizens. Their insistence on the rational basis of their policies seemed like arrogant dismissal of popular concerns. Their appeals to the benefits their rule had brought to Croton appeared to confirm accusations that they saw themselves as the city's natural superiors. As tensions mounted, violence became increasingly likely. Cylon's followers began disrupting Pythagorean meetings and threatening individual community members. Several prominent Pythagoreans were attacked in the streets. The city's government, still dominated by Pythagorean supporters, struggled to maintain order without appearing to use their power to silence legitimate opposition. Pythagoras himself finally emerged from his scholarly retirement to address the crisis. Now 70 years old, his hair white and his face lined with age, he nevertheless retained the magnetic presence that had first attracted followers decades earlier. In a series of public speeches, he attempted to explain the Pythagorean philosophy in terms that ordinary citizens could understand, and to address the specific grievances that had been raised against his community. His speeches were masterpieces of reasoned argument and emotional appeal. He reminded his listeners of the prosperity and cultural achievements that Croton had enjoyed under Pythagorean influence. He explained that their mathematical investigations were not attempts to gain supernatural powers, but efforts to understand the divine order that governed all existence. He insisted that their goal was not to rule over others, but to help all human beings achieve their highest potential through education and moral development. For a moment, it seemed that Pythagoras might succeed in diffusing the crisis through the power of rational discourse. Many citizens who had been swept up in Cylon's campaign began to reconsider their opposition. Even some of Cylon's supporters were moved by the old philosopher's obvious sincerity and his genuine concern for the welfare of the city. But the forces that had been unleashed were too powerful to be contained by words alone. Cylon and his inner circle were committed to the complete destruction of Pythagorean influence, and they recognized that this might be their only opportunity to achieve that goal. They had invested too much in their campaign to accept any compromise that would leave the Pythagoreans with significant power. The violence began on a festival day when many Pythagoreans had gathered in their meeting hall for a special ceremony. Cylon's followers, armed with clubs and torches, surrounded the building and demanded that the Pythagoreans surrender their political offices and leave Croton immediately. When the community refused, the attackers set fire to the building. What followed was one of the most tragic episodes in the history of ancient philosophy. Trapped inside the burning hall, many Pythagoreans died in the flames. Others who tried to escape were beaten by the mob outside. Some of the most brilliant mathematical minds of the ancient world perished in a few hours of senseless violence. The exact details of what happened to Pythagoras himself remain disputed. Some ancient sources claim he died in the fire, along with his followers. Others suggest he escaped but was so devastated by the destruction of his life's work that he soon died of grief. Still others maintain that he fled to another city, where he lived out his final years in obscurity, never again attempting to establish a philosophical community. What is certain is that the violent destruction of the Pythagorean community in Croton marked the end of the first great experiment in applying mathematical philosophy to practical politics. The dream of rational government based on mathematical principles had ended in flames and bloodshed, a cautionary tale about the dangers of intellectual arrogance and the difficulties of translating abstract ideals into workable social institutions. But the ideas that had been born in the Pythagorean community would survive the destruction of their physical manifestation. Surviving members of the community scattered throughout the Greek world, carrying with them the mathematical and philosophical insights they had developed. Some established new schools in other cities, others became travelling teachers, spreading Pythagorean ideas wherever they went. The influence of these scattered Pythagoreans would prove to be enormous. Plato encountered Pythagorean teachers during his travels in southern Italy and incorporated many of their ideas into his own philosophical system. The Platonic theory of forms, with its emphasis on eternal mathematical relationships underlying physical reality, owed a clear debt to Pythagorean insights about the mathematical nature of existence. Early Christian thinkers found in Pythagorean number mysticism a framework for understanding divine creation that could be harmonized with biblical accounts. The idea that God had created the world according to mathematical principles became central to medieval Christian philosophy and laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution that would transform European thought centuries later. Islamic philosophers preserved and developed Pythagorean mathematical techniques, particularly in the areas of astronomy and music theory. The great centers of learning in Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba became repositories of Pythagorean wisdom during the European Dark Ages, ensuring that these insights would survive to inspire later generations of thinkers. Even the practical applications of Pythagorean mathematics continued to evolve and spread. Their geometric techniques influenced architectural developments throughout the Mediterranean world. Their astronomical calculations contributed to more accurate navigation methods that enabled the age of exploration. Their medical theories helped lay the foundation for more systematic approaches to healing. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Pythagorean experiment was its demonstration that mathematics could serve as more than just a practical tool for solving everyday problems. Pythagoras and his followers had shown that mathematical investigation could be a form of spiritual practice, a way of approaching the deepest questions about the nature of reality and the meaning of human existence. This insight would resurface again and again throughout Western intellectual history. From the medieval schoolmen who saw mathematical relationships as reflections of divine order, to modern physicists who seek a theory of everything that will reduce all natural phenomena to elegant mathematical equations. The Pythagorean vision of a mathematically structured universe has continued to inspire and guide human thought. The story of Pythagoras and his community also provided a template for understanding the relationship between intellectual discovery and social transformation. Their experience demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of attempts to reshape society according to rational principles. Their successes showed that mathematical insights could indeed lead to practical improvements in human life. Their ultimate failure revealed the importance of maintaining connections between intellectual elites and broader popular concerns. The tragic end of the Pythagorean community in Croton became a cautionary tale that would influence political thinkers for centuries. Plato's Republic, with its careful attention to the practical challenges of implementing an ideal state, can be read as an attempt to learn from Pythagorean mistakes. Modern democratic theory, with its emphasis on the importance of popular participation and the dangers of technocratic rule, reflects lessons learned from the Pythagorean experiments. Yet for all its tragic conclusion, the Pythagorean movement had achieved something remarkable. In the space of a few decades, a small community of philosophical investigators had revolutionized human understanding of mathematics, astronomy, music, medicine, and politics. They had demonstrated that careful rational inquiry could unlock secrets of nature that had been hidden for centuries. They had shown that abstract mathematical principles could have practical applications that improved human life. Most importantly, they had established the principle that would become central to all subsequent Western philosophy and science. The universe was not a realm of arbitrary chaos ruled by capricious gods, but an ordered cosmos governed by rational principles that human intelligence could discover and understand. This insight, born from Pythagoras' synthesis of Egyptian geometry, Babylonian astronomy, and Greek rational inquiry, would prove to be one of the most influential ideas in human history. The mathematical techniques developed by the Pythagoreans would be refined and extended by later generations of investigators. Their geometric theorems would be systematized by Euclid and applied by Archimedes. Their number theory would evolve into modern algebra and analysis. Their astronomical observations would contribute to the heliocentric revolution initiated by Copernicus and completed by Kepler and Newton. But beyond these technical contributions, the Pythagorean vision of mathematics as a key to understanding ultimate reality would continue to inspire thinkers who sought to bridge the gap between scientific knowledge and spiritual wisdom. The idea that the universe spoke in the language of mathematics, that numbers were not just human constructions, but fundamental features of existence itself, would echo through the centuries in forms both sophisticated and naive. As news of the destruction of the Pythagorean community spread throughout the Greek world, it marked not just the end of a particular philosophical experiment, but the beginning of a new phase in the development of Western thought. The questions that Pythagoras had raised about the relationship between mathematics and reality, between knowledge and power, between intellectual insight and social responsibility, would continue to challenge and inspire future generations of thinkers. The mathematical mysticism that had flourished in the gardens and meeting halls of Croton would find new expressions in the academy that Plato would establish in Athens, in the House of Wisdom that would arise in Baghdad, in the universities that would transform medieval Europe, and in the research institutes that would drive the scientific revolution of the modern era. The flames that consumed the Pythagorean meeting hall in Croton sent smoke signals across the ancient world, but they could not burn away the ideas that had been forged within those walls. As survivors fled into the night, carrying with them fragments of mathematical wisdom and bitter memories of violence, they were unknowingly beginning one of the most remarkable intellectual diaspora in human history. Among those who escaped the inferno was Philolaus, one of Pythagoras' most brilliant disciples and the first to commit Pythagorean teachings to writing. For decades, the community's most sacred insights had been preserved only in the minds of initiates, passed down through oral tradition and protected by solemn vows of secrecy. But the destruction of their centre forced a painful recognition. If their discoveries were to survive, they could no longer rely on the fragile vessel of human memory alone. Philolaus found refuge in the city of Tarentum, where sympathetic allies provided him with the resources to begin the monumental task of recording what had been lost. Working in secret, often by candlelight in hidden rooms, he began to transcribe the mathematical theorems, astronomical observations, and philosophical insights that had been accumulated over decades of collective investigation. His writings were revolutionary, not just in their content, but in their very existence. For the first time, the inner teachings of the Pythagorean school were being preserved in permanent form, though Philolaus was careful to encode the most sensitive material in symbolic language that would be meaningless to the uninitiated. These texts would become the foundation for all later understanding of Pythagorean philosophy, influencing thinkers from Plato to medieval Islamic scholars to Renaissance mathematicians. But Philolaus was not the only survivor working to preserve the Pythagorean legacy. Across southern Italy and Sicily, scattered groups of former community members were establishing new schools and attracting new students. These were not attempts to recreate the grand experiment of Croton, but smaller, more modest efforts to continue the mathematical and philosophical investigations that had been so brutally interrupted. In Metapontum, Eurytus developed new approaches to number theory that pushed beyond the simple ratios that had originally defined Pythagorean mathematics. His investigations into what we might now call mathematical series and sequences revealed patterns that seemed to govern everything from the arrangement of leaves on a stem to the spiral structure of seashells. Nature itself, he argued, was constantly demonstrating mathematical principles for those who knew how to look. Meanwhile, in Syracuse, Echecrates was applying Pythagorean medical theories to develop new treatments for mental illness. The idea that psychological disorders might result from mathematical imbalances in the soul rather than demonic possession was revolutionary for its time. His careful observations of patients and systematic testing of different therapeutic approaches helped establish medicine as a rational discipline based on natural causes rather than supernatural intervention. These scattered communities maintained contact with each other through a network of travelling scholars who carried new discoveries from city to city. They developed a sophisticated system of mathematical notation that allowed complex ideas to be transmitted accurately across distances. Most importantly, they preserved the Pythagorean conviction that mathematical investigation was not merely an intellectual exercise, but a form of spiritual practice that could transform both individual consciousness and human society. The influence of these Neo-Pythagorean communities began to spread beyond the Greek world. Egyptian scholars working in the Great Library of Alexandria encountered Pythagorean texts and found in them mathematical techniques that complemented their own astronomical traditions. They began to develop new methods for calculating planetary positions that would eventually contribute to the work of Ptolemy and other great ancient astronomers. In Babylon, mathematicians who had preserved their own numerical traditions for centuries discovered that Pythagorean geometric methods could solve problems that had puzzled them for generations. The synthesis of Babylonian algebra with Pythagorean geometry created new mathematical possibilities that would not be fully explored until the Islamic Golden Age centuries later. But perhaps the most significant development was taking place in Athens, where a young aristocrat named Plato was beginning his own philosophical journey. Plato had grown up hearing stories about the Pythagorean experiment in Croton, and the violent destruction of that community had left a deep impression on his developing political philosophy. How could rational governance be achieved without falling into the trap of intellectual arrogance that had doomed the Pythagoreans? When Plato travelled to southern Italy in his 30s, he sought out surviving Pythagorean teachers and spent months studying their mathematical methods and philosophical insights. The experience was transformative. He encountered in Pythagorean thought a vision of reality that perfectly complemented his own emerging ideas about the relationship between the physical world and eternal truths. The Pythagorean theory of forms, the idea that mathematical relationships represented eternal realities that existed independently of the physical world, became central to Plato's own philosophical system. His famous allegory of the cave, with its distinction between shadows on the wall and the true reality beyond, owed a clear debt to Pythagorean teachings about the illusory nature of sensory experience and the superior reality of mathematical truth. But Plato also learned from the political failures of the Pythagorean experiment. His Republic, with its careful attention to the education of guardians and the gradual introduction of philosophical ideas to the broader population, can be read as an attempt to avoid the mistakes that had led to the destruction of the Pythagorean community. Where the Pythagoreans had assumed that mathematical wisdom automatically qualified them for political leadership, Plato recognized the need for a more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between knowledge and power. The academy that Plato established in Athens became, in many ways, a continuation of the Pythagorean tradition adapted to new circumstances. Like the original Pythagorean community, it emphasized the centrality of mathematics to philosophical education. Students were required to master geometry and arithmetic before moving on to higher philosophical studies. The famous inscription over the academy's entrance, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here," reflected the Pythagorean conviction that mathematical training was essential for understanding ultimate reality. But unlike the secretive Pythagorean communities, the academy was relatively open to outside scrutiny and participation. Plato had learned that intellectual isolation bred suspicion and resentment among those excluded from its benefits. His school sought to influence society through education and persuasion rather than direct political control, avoiding the confrontations that had destroyed the Pythagorean experiment. The mathematical curriculum at the academy built directly on Pythagorean foundations while extending their insights in new directions. Students studied not just the practical applications of geometric theorems, but their philosophical implications. They learned to see mathematical relationships as glimpses into a higher realm of perfect forms that existed beyond the changing world of physical experience. This Platonic synthesis of Pythagorean mathematics with broader philosophical inquiry proved extraordinarily influential. The academy attracted students from across the Mediterranean world, and many of them carried Pythagorean-influenced ideas back to their home cities. Within a generation, mathematical approaches to philosophy and natural investigation were spreading throughout the Greek world and beyond. One of the most remarkable developments was the emergence of mathematical astronomy as a systematic discipline, building on Pythagorean insights about numerical relationships in celestial movements. Academy-trained scholars began developing geometric models that could predict planetary positions with unprecedented accuracy. These models would eventually evolve into the sophisticated astronomical systems of Hipparchus and Ptolemy that dominated scientific thought for over a millennium. The Pythagorean influence also spread into other areas of intellectual inquiry. In medicine, the idea that health resulted from mathematical balance among bodily elements inspired new approaches to diagnosis and treatment. In music theory, Pythagorean insights about numerical ratios led to more sophisticated understanding of harmonic relationships and the development of new musical scales and instruments. Even in practical arts like architecture and engineering, Pythagorean mathematical principles began to influence design and construction. The proportional relationships that Pythagoras had discovered in musical harmony were applied to building design, creating structures that seemed to embody mathematical beauty in physical form. The Parthenon, completed during this period, reflected these influences in its careful attention to geometric ratios and proportional relationships. But the most profound legacy of the Pythagorean tradition lay in its transformation of how humans understood their place in the cosmos. Before Pythagoras, most ancient peoples saw the universe as fundamentally chaotic, ruled by capricious gods whose actions could not be predicted or understood. The natural world was mysterious and threatening, a realm where human reason had little power. The Pythagorean vision replaced this chaotic cosmos with an ordered universe governed by mathematical laws that human intelligence could discover and comprehend. This was not just an intellectual revolution, but a spiritual one. If the universe operated according to rational principles, then human beings, as rational creatures, were not aliens in a hostile cosmos, but participants in a grand mathematical symphony. This insight had profound implications for how people understood their moral and spiritual responsibilities. If the universe was mathematically ordered, then human society should be organized according to rational principles as well as. Justice was not arbitrary, but could be understood through mathematical concepts of proportion and balance. Virtue was not a matter of following arbitrary rules, but of bringing one's soul into harmony with the mathematical structure of reality itself. The Pythagorean influence on early Christian thought was particularly significant. Christian theologians found in Pythagorean number mysticism a framework for understanding divine creation that could be harmonized with biblical accounts. The idea that God had created the world according to mathematical principles, that number and proportion reflected divine wisdom, became central to Christian philosophy and would later inspire the scientific revolution. St. Augustine, writing in the 5th century, drew heavily on Pythagorean-influenced Platonic ideas about the relationship between temporal and eternal reality. His vision of history as a rational progression toward divine fulfillment owed much to the Pythagorean conviction that mathematical order underlay apparent chaos. The medieval synthesis of Christian theology with Aristotelian philosophy would later incorporate many Pythagorean insights about the mathematical structure of the natural world. Islamic scholars preserved and extended Pythagorean mathematical techniques during the European Dark Ages. The great centers of learning in Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba became repositories of Pythagorean wisdom, ensuring that these insights would survive to inspire later generations of European thinkers. Islamic mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Kindi built directly on Pythagorean foundations in developing algebra and advancing geometric knowledge. The rediscovery of Pythagorean texts during the Renaissance sparked new interest in mathematical approaches to understanding nature. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci and Johannes Kepler saw themselves as continuing the Pythagorean tradition of seeking mathematical harmony in natural phenomena. The scientific revolution that transformed European thought in the 16th and 17th centuries was, in many ways, a fulfillment of the Pythagorean vision of a mathematically comprehensible universe. Modern physics, with its search for mathematical laws that govern everything from subatomic particles to galactic clusters, represents the latest chapter in a story that began with Pythagoras and his followers on the island of Samos over 2 millennia ago. When contemporary scientists speak of the universe as fundamentally mathematical, when they seek elegant equations that can describe all natural phenomena, they are echoing insights first articulated in the meeting halls and gardens of ancient Pythagorean communities. The tragic destruction of the original Pythagorean experiment in Croton had forced a painful recognition about the relationship between intellectual achievement and political power. But it had also demonstrated the remarkable resilience of ideas that capture fundamental truths about reality. The flames that consumed their meeting hall could destroy buildings and kill individuals, but they could not eliminate insights that had already taken root in human consciousness. As the scattered survivors of the Pythagorean communities continued their work in new locations and under new circumstances, they were unknowingly laying the foundation for intellectual traditions that would shape human thought for millennia to come. Their conviction that reality was fundamentally mathematical, that human reason could comprehend cosmic order, that knowledge brought both power and responsibility, would echo through centuries of philosophical, scientific, and spiritual inquiry. The story of Pythagoras and his followers had become more than just an episode in ancient Greek history. It had become a template for understanding how revolutionary ideas emerge, spread, encounter resistance, and ultimately transform human consciousness. Their example would inspire countless later thinkers who sought to bridge the gap between abstract knowledge and practical wisdom, between individual insight and social transformation. The mathematical techniques they developed would be refined and extended by later generations of investigators. Their geometric theorems would be systematized by Euclid and applied by Archimedes. Their astronomical observations would contribute to the work of Copernicus and Kepler. Their number theory would evolve into modern algebra and mathematical analysis. But beyond these technical contributions, the Pythagorean vision of mathematics as a key to understanding ultimate reality would continue to inspire thinkers who sought to find meaning and purpose in scientific knowledge. The idea that the universe spoke in the language of mathematics, that rational investigation could reveal divine truths, would take new forms in each generation while maintaining its essential character. The questions that Pythagoras had raised about the relationship between mind and reality, between mathematical knowledge and spiritual wisdom, between individual enlightenment and social responsibility, would continue to challenge and inspire future generations of thinkers. In laboratories and universities, in observatories and research institutes, in the quiet moments when a scientist glimpses an elegant pattern underlying apparent chaos, the spirit of Pythagorean inquiry lives on. The legacy of Pythagoras extends far beyond the mathematical theorems and philosophical insights that emerged from his communities. In the centuries following the destruction of Croton, something remarkable began to happen. The ideas that had been forged in those secretive meeting halls started appearing in places and forms that would have astonished their original creators. In the bustling marketplaces of Alexandria, merchants used geometric principles to calculate fair prices and optimal shipping routes. Egyptian engineers applied Pythagorean techniques to design irrigation systems that maximized agricultural productivity. The practical mathematics that had once been the closely guarded secret of an elite philosophical community was becoming part of the everyday toolkit of craftsmen and traders throughout the Mediterranean world. But this democratization of mathematical knowledge came with unexpected consequences. As Pythagorean techniques spread beyond their original context, they began to evolve in ways that diverged from the master's original vision. What had been conceived as spiritual practice became practical methodology. What had been mystical revelation became mundane calculation. The tension between these two aspects of the Pythagorean inheritance would shape intellectual development for centuries to come. On one side were those who preserved the mystical dimension of mathematical inquiry, seeing in numbers and geometric relationships glimpses of divine truth that transcended material concerns. On the other were practical investigators who used mathematical techniques to solve concrete problems without necessarily accepting the metaphysical framework that had originally justified them. This split manifested most clearly in the different ways that various cultures absorbed and transformed Pythagorean ideas. In the Greek world, mathematical investigation remained closely tied to philosophical speculation about the ultimate nature of reality. Students at the academy and other philosophical schools continue to see geometry and arithmetic as stepping stones toward higher wisdom, tools for training the soul to perceive eternal truths. But in the Roman world, mathematics increasingly became a practical discipline focused on engineering, administration, and military applications. Roman engineers used geometric principles to build roads and aqueducts without necessarily embracing Pythagorean beliefs about the mystical significance of mathematical relationships. The utility of mathematical knowledge was separated from its supposed spiritual value. This pragmatic approach to mathematics would prove enormously influential in shaping later Western attitudes toward scientific knowledge. The Roman emphasis on practical results rather than theoretical understanding established a pattern that would persist through medieval and modern times. Mathematics was valuable not because it revealed cosmic truths, but because it worked, because it enabled people to build better buildings, navigate more accurately, and solve practical problems more efficiently. Yet the mystical dimension of Pythagorean thought never entirely disappeared. It went underground, preserved by esoteric traditions that maintained the original connection between mathematical knowledge and spiritual transformation. These hidden schools kept alive the conviction that numbers were more than mere tools, that mathematical relationships reflected fundamental structures of reality that could be accessed through disciplined contemplation and purification. The survival of these esoteric traditions ensured that Pythagorean ideas would resurface periodically in new forms throughout Western history. Medieval Christian mystics rediscovered Pythagorean number symbolism and incorporated it into their theological speculations. Renaissance humanists found in Pythagorean texts inspiration for new approaches to understanding both natural phenomena and human nature. The Islamic preservation of Pythagorean mathematics during the European Dark Ages proved particularly crucial for the later development of Western thought. Scholars in Baghdad and Cordoba not only preserved ancient texts, but extended Pythagorean insights in new directions. They developed algebraic techniques that complemented geometric methods, created new astronomical instruments based on mathematical principles, and maintained the tradition of seeing mathematical investigation as a form of spiritual practice. When these Islamic developments reached medieval Europe, through translations and cultural exchange, they sparked a renaissance of mathematical thinking that would eventually culminate in the scientific revolution. European scholars encountered not just the original Pythagorean insights, but centuries of accumulated refinements and extensions that had been preserved and developed in Islamic centers of learning. The medieval synthesis of Christian theology with rediscovered mathematical knowledge created new possibilities for understanding both divine creation and natural phenomena. Scholastic philosophers like Thomas Aquinas found ways to harmonize Aristotelian logic with Pythagorean mathematical mysticism, creating comprehensive systems of thought that could accommodate both rational inquiry and religious faith. The cathedral schools and early universities that emerged during this period incorporated mathematical training into their curricula in ways that explicitly acknowledged the Pythagorean heritage. Students learned geometry and arithmetic not just as practical skills, but as preparation for theological study. The mathematical structure of creation was seen as reflecting divine wisdom that could be apprehended through careful study and contemplation. This medieval marriage of mathematics and theology created an intellectual atmosphere that would prove conducive to revolutionary developments in natural philosophy. When figures like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler began developing new models of astronomical phenomena, they could draw on a tradition that had always insisted on the mathematical character of cosmic order. The heliocentric revolution that transformed European understanding of planetary motion was in many ways a vindication of original Pythagorean insights about mathematical harmony in celestial phenomena. When Kepler discovered that planetary orbits followed elliptical paths governed by precise mathematical relationships, he was fulfilling the ancient Pythagorean dream of finding numerical order in the movements of heavenly bodies. But the scientific revolution also transformed the meaning of mathematical knowledge in ways that would have troubled Pythagoras himself. The mystical dimension of mathematical investigation gradually gave way to a more mechanistic understanding of natural phenomena. Numbers and geometric relationships were no longer seen as divine principles, but as descriptive tools for understanding material processes. This transformation reached its culmination in the work of Isaac Newton, whose mathematical laws of motion and gravitation seem to reduce all natural phenomena to mechanical interactions governed by precise mathematical rules. The Newtonian universe was thoroughly mathematical, but it was also thoroughly material. The spiritual dimension that had been central to original Pythagorean thought was effectively eliminated from scientific discourse. Yet even as the scientific revolution secularized mathematical knowledge, it preserved and extended the fundamental Pythagorean insight about the mathematical character of natural phenomena. Modern physics, with its search for mathematical laws that govern everything from quantum mechanics to cosmology, represents a direct continuation of the tradition that began with Pythagoras and his followers. Contemporary scientists may not share Pythagorean beliefs about the mystical significance of numbers, but they have embraced and extended the conviction that reality is fundamentally mathematical in structure. When modern physicists speak of seeking a theory of everything that will reduce all natural phenomena to elegant mathematical equations, they are pursuing goals that would have been immediately recognizable to ancient Pythagorean investigators. The development of computer technology has created new possibilities for exploring mathematical relationships that would have fascinated Pythagorean thinkers. Digital simulations can model complex systems governed by mathematical rules, revealing patterns and harmonies that were invisible to earlier generations of investigators. The computational power available to modern researchers allows exploration of mathematical concepts that were beyond the reach of ancient geometric and arithmetic techniques. Yet these technological advances have also raised new questions about the relationship between mathematical knowledge and reality itself. If complex natural phenomena can be accurately modeled by computer algorithms, does this confirm the Pythagorean vision of a mathematically structured universe? Or does it simply demonstrate the power of mathematical tools to approximate natural processes? The philosophical implications of these developments continue to generate debate among scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers. Some contemporary thinkers embrace what might be called neo-Pythagorean views, arguing that mathematical relationships are fundamental features of reality rather than human constructions. Others maintain more skeptical positions, seeing mathematics as useful but ultimately arbitrary systems of symbols and operations. This ongoing debate reflects tensions that were present in Pythagorean thought from the beginning. The claim that numbers and geometric relationships reveal ultimate truths about reality has always been difficult to prove or refute definitively. The practical success of mathematical methods in solving problems and predicting natural phenomena provides strong evidence for some kind of deep connection between mathematical structures and natural processes, but the precise nature of this connection remains mysterious. The social and political dimensions of Pythagorean thought have also continued to evolve and influence later developments. The idea that society should be organized according to rational principles, discoverable through careful investigation, has inspired numerous reform movements and revolutionary experiments throughout Western history. The Enlightenment philosophers of the 18th century explicitly drew on Pythagorean traditions in developing their vision of rational government and social progress. Figures like Voltaire and Jefferson believed that human reason could discover natural laws governing social and political relationships, just as it had revealed mathematical laws governing physical phenomena. The democratic revolutions of the modern era reflected this confidence in the power of rational inquiry to improve human institutions. The American Constitution, with its careful system of checks and balances based on theoretical analysis of governmental power, embodied Pythagorean ideals about the possibility of creating just societies through the application of rational principles. Yet modern democratic societies have also had to grapple with the same tensions between expertise and popular participation that destroyed the original Pythagorean experiment in Croton. How much authority should be given to technical experts who possess specialized knowledge? How can complex policy decisions be made democratically when most citizens lack the training necessary to evaluate technical arguments? These questions have become increasingly urgent as modern societies confront challenges that require sophisticated, scientific, and mathematical analysis. Climate change, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and other contemporary issues involve technical complexities that far exceed the mathematical knowledge possessed by most citizens. The Pythagorean dream of rational governance based on expert knowledge conflicts with democratic ideals about popular sovereignty and political equality. The educational implications of Pythagorean thought have also continued to generate controversy and innovation. The idea that mathematical training is essential for developing rational thinking abilities has influenced educational theory and practice for centuries. Yet debates continue about how mathematics should be taught and what role it should play in general education. Some contemporary educators embrace approaches that emphasize the connections between mathematical concepts and broader philosophical questions about the nature of reality and knowledge. They see mathematics education as an opportunity to develop not just computational skills, but critical thinking abilities, an appreciation for the elegance and beauty of mathematical relationships. Others argue for more practical approaches that focus on the applications of mathematical knowledge to real-world problems. From this perspective, mathematics education should prepare students to use quantitative reasoning in their professional and personal lives rather than initiating them into abstract philosophical speculation. These debates reflect deeper questions about the purposes of education and the relationship between specialized knowledge and general cultural understanding. The Pythagorean tradition has always insisted that mathematical knowledge has value beyond its practical applications. That exposure to mathematical thinking transforms consciousness in ways that benefit both individuals and society. Yet the increasing specialization of modern knowledge has made it difficult to maintain this holistic vision. Few contemporary students have the time or inclination to master both advanced mathematics and broader humanistic learning. The synthesis of mathematical and philosophical inquiry that characterized Pythagorean education has largely given way to narrow disciplinary training that produces experts in particular fields without necessarily developing wisdom about their broader significance. The technological revolution of recent decades has created new possibilities for reviving aspects of the Pythagorean educational vision. Digital tools can make mathematical concepts more accessible to students who lack advanced technical training. Computer visualizations can reveal geometric relationships that were previously invisible. Interactive simulations can allow exploration of mathematical principles without requiring mastery of complex computational techniques. These developments suggest possibilities for educational approaches that could recapture some of the excitement and wonder that originally attracted students to Pythagorean communities. By making mathematical beauty and harmony more accessible, technology might help restore connections between mathematical knowledge and broader questions about meaning and purpose that motivated ancient Pythagorean investigations. The artistic and aesthetic dimensions of Pythagorean thought have also continued to influence cultural development in surprising ways. The idea that mathematical relationships underlie aesthetic beauty has inspired artists, musicians, composers, and architects throughout Western history. From medieval cathedral builders to contemporary digital artists, creators have sought to embody mathematical principles in their work. The development of perspective in Renaissance painting drew directly on geometric principles that originated in Pythagorean investigations. The harmonic ratios discovered by ancient Pythagorean musicians continue to influence compositional techniques in both classical and popular music. Contemporary architects still use proportional relationships derived from Pythagorean geometry in designing buildings that seem to embody mathematical harmony in physical form. Yet the relationship between mathematical structure and aesthetic experience remains as mysterious as it was in Pythagoras' time. Why do certain mathematical relationships produce experiences of beauty and satisfaction? Is this response learned through cultural conditioning, or does it reflect deeper features of human consciousness that connect us to mathematical structures in reality itself? These questions have taken on new urgency as digital technologies create unprecedented possibilities for exploring the connections between mathematical patterns and aesthetic experience. Computer-generated art and music can explore mathematical relationships that would have been impossible to realize through traditional media. Virtual reality environments can create immersive experiences of mathematical concepts that engage multiple senses simultaneously. The results of these technological experiments have been both fascinating and puzzling. Some computer-generated works based on mathematical algorithms do seem to possess genuine aesthetic power, suggesting deep connections between mathematical structure and aesthetic response. Others remain cold and mechanical, despite their mathematical sophistication, indicating that aesthetic value cannot be reduced to mathematical relationships alone. The spiritual and religious dimensions of Pythagorean thought have also continued to evolve and influence later developments, though often in forms that would have surprised the original practitioners. The idea that mathematical knowledge provides access to divine truth has inspired mystical traditions throughout Western history, from medieval Christian contemplatives to contemporary New Age movements. Many of these later developments have distorted or simplified original Pythagorean insights, reducing sophisticated mathematical and philosophical investigations to superficial numerological speculation. The popular association of Pythagorean ideas with fortune-telling and occult practices reflects a degradation of traditions that originally emphasized rigorous intellectual discipline and moral purification. Yet serious attempts to revive authentic Pythagorean spiritual practices have also emerged periodically throughout history. Renaissance humanists like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola sought to recover the original synthesis of mathematical knowledge and spiritual transformation. Contemporary scholars and practitioners have attempted to reconstruct ancient Pythagorean techniques for using mathematical contemplation as a form of spiritual practice. These efforts have revealed both the enduring appeal and the practical difficulties of the Pythagorean approach to spiritual development. The idea that mathematical investigation can transform consciousness and provide access to higher levels of reality continues to attract serious seekers. Yet the demanding intellectual and moral discipline required for authentic Pythagorean practice makes it accessible only to a small number of dedicated practitioners. The ecological and environmental implications of Pythagorean thought have become increasingly relevant as modern societies confront the consequences of industrial development and technological expansion. The Pythagorean vision of cosmic harmony, based on mathematical relationships, provides a framework for understanding environmental problems as symptoms of broader disruptions in natural order. Contemporary environmental movements have drawn on Pythagorean ideas about the interconnectedness of all natural phenomena in developing holistic approaches to ecological restoration. The idea that human activities should be harmonized with natural cycles reflects Pythagorean insights about the importance of maintaining proper relationships and proportions in all aspects of existence. Yet the practical application of these principles to contemporary environmental challenges requires sophisticated scientific and mathematical analysis that goes far beyond ancient Pythagorean capabilities. Climate modeling, ecological systems analysis, and other tools necessary for understanding environmental problems demand technical expertise that few citizens possess. This creates another version of the familiar tension between expert knowledge and democratic participation that has plagued Pythagorean-inspired movements throughout history. How can societies make informed decisions about environmental policies when the relevant scientific information is accessible only to specialists? How can the Pythagorean ideal of rational governance be reconciled with democratic values in an age of increasing technical complexity? The psychological and cognitive dimensions of Pythagorean thought have also generated new interest as contemporary researchers investigate the relationship between mathematical thinking and mental development. Studies of how children learn mathematical concepts have revealed patterns that seem to confirm ancient Pythagorean insights about the connection between mathematical knowledge and rational thinking abilities. Research on mathematical cognition has shown that exposure to mathematical concepts does indeed develop general reasoning abilities that transfer to other domains of knowledge. Students who master mathematical problem-solving techniques show improved performance in areas ranging from scientific investigation to ethical reasoning, suggesting that the Pythagorean emphasis on mathematical education as preparation for wisdom has empirical support. Yet contemporary psychological research has also revealed the limitations and potential dangers of overemphasizing mathematical approaches to understanding human experience. The reduction of complex social and personal problems to quantitative analysis can lead to oversimplification and loss of important qualitative dimensions of human experience. The challenge for contemporary educators and policymakers is finding ways to capture the benefits of mathematical thinking while avoiding the mechanistic reductionism that can result from applying mathematical methods inappropriately. The Pythagorean tradition offers resources for addressing this challenge through its emphasis on the spiritual and aesthetic dimensions of mathematical knowledge. But translating these insights into contemporary, educational, and social practices requires careful attention to both historical wisdom and current understanding. As we survey the remarkable influence of Pythagorean thought across more than 2 millennia of intellectual development, certain patterns become clear. The fundamental insights about the mathematical character of natural phenomena, the importance of rational inquiry, and the connections between knowledge and moral responsibility have proven remarkably durable and adaptable to changing circumstances. Yet each generation has also transformed these insights in ways that reflect their own particular concerns and capabilities. The mystical dimensions of original Pythagorean thought have sometimes been preserved and sometimes abandoned. The practical applications of mathematical knowledge have been extended far beyond anything ancient practitioners could have imagined. The social and political implications of rational governance continue to generate both inspiration and controversy. The story of Pythagorean influence is ultimately a story about the power and limitations of human reason itself. The conviction that careful investigation can reveal fundamental truths about reality has driven extraordinary achievements in science, mathematics, philosophy, and other domains of knowledge. Yet the application of rational methods to human affairs has also generated conflicts and disappointments that remind us of the complexity and mystery that persist even in our most sophisticated understanding. The ancient Pythagorean communities that flourished briefly in southern Italy represented one of humanity's earliest and most ambitious attempts to create a comprehensive synthesis of mathematical knowledge, philosophical wisdom, and practical social organization. Their ultimate failure reminds us that even the most brilliant insights must be implemented with humility, compassion, and attention to the full complexity of human experience. And so we reach the end of this extraordinary journey through the life and legacy of Pythagoras, a man whose influence on human thought defies simple measurement. From his birth on the sun-drenched island of Samos to the tragic flames that consumed his community in Croton, from the mystical teachings about the transmigration of souls to the mathematical discoveries that still shape our understanding of reality, Pythagoras gave humanity something unprecedented. He showed us that numbers are not just tools for counting, but windows into the fundamental structure of existence itself. His vision of a universe governed by mathematical harmony continues to inspire scientists, philosophers, and seekers of truth 25 centuries after his death. Every time we marvel at an elegant equation, every time we seek rational solutions to human problems, every time we wonder about the deeper patterns that connect all things, we are walking in the footsteps of the mysterious sage from Samos who dared to believe that reality itself speaks in the language of mathematics.